The rain returned that night, steady, rhythmic, and almost comforting. The drops tapped softly against the window pane as Linda sat at the kitchen table, sorting through old photo albums. The soft glow of the lamp filled the room with warmth. Wrapping the quiet space in memory, each picture was a frozen moment of time. Ethan's first bicycle, the family picnic by the lake, the birthday when his father surprised them with a cake shaped like a sailboat. The laughter captured in those photographs almost felt alive. Echoing faintly through her heart, she turned a page and stopped. There was a picture of Ethan and Emily Young, smiling, carefree. Linda remembered that summer well. Emily had come over often, helping in the garden, joining them for dinners. Even then, Linda had noticed the way her son looked at her with a kind of wonder only first love carries. Linda smiled softly, then sighed. So much has changed, she thought. But maybe not everything just then. The floor creaked behind her. She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, hands tucked in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Can't sleep again?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I heard you moving around. Thought I'd keep you company. Come," she said, patting the chair beside her. "I was just visiting the past." Ethan sat down, glancing at the album. His eyes landed on the photo of him and Emily, and something in his expression shifted. A soft ache, a memory too full to name. "You still have this?" he asked quietly. "Of course," Linda said. "It was a good day." He nodded. "It was," he murmured. "It feels like another lifetime." "Do you ever talk to her?" Linda asked gently. He hesitated. "Not anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the rain outside. Then Ethan took a slow breath, as if gathering courage. "Mom," he began, "there's something I haven't told you. Something I came here to say. But every time I try, the words disappear." Linda closed the album, sensing the gravity in his voice. "Take your time," she said softly. "I'm listening." He looked down at his hands. "Do you remember the night before Dad passed away? How you told me that love isn't about perfect timing, it's about being brave enough to show up?" Linda nodded, her throat tightening. "I remember. I didn't understand it then," he said. "I thought love was supposed to wait until everything made sense, but it doesn't. It's messy and confusing, and it hurts when you run from it." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "When Emily and I broke up, it wasn't because we stopped caring. It was because I was afraid that if I stayed, I'd never become the man I thought I needed to be. So I left. I told myself I'd come back someday when I was ready." Linda's eyes softened with quiet sadness. "And now," Ethan looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. "Now I know there's no someday. There's only what we have right now. I thought coming home would give me peace, but it's done something else. It's made me realize how much I've been avoiding my heart." Linda reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "Ethan," she said, "you don't need to carry that guilt forever. You loved her the best you could back then. That counts for something." He shook his head. "It's not just about her, Mom. It's about everything. I've been running from memories, from loss, from myself, even from you." His voice cracked on the last word. "When Dad died, I couldn't stand being here. Every corner of this house reminded me of him. I thought if I left, I could start over. But all I did was lose touch with the people who mattered most." Linda's eyes glistened. "You were grieving. You did what you thought you had to do." "I know," he said, "but I never told you how sorry I am. For disappearing. For not calling. For letting silence take the place of words." A tear slipped down his cheek. "You deserved better than that." Linda's heart broke and healed all at once. She rose from her chair, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around him. "You came back," she whispered. "That's what matters. You came back." For a moment, Ethan said nothing, just leaned into her embrace. Like a child who had been holding his breath for years. "I was afraid you'd be disappointed in me," said softly. Linda smiled through her tears. "Oh, Ethan, how could I ever be disappointed in someone who still has the courage to love?" They stayed like that for a long while, the rain outside blending with the quiet rhythm of forgiveness. When they finally sat down again, Ethan took a deep breath. "There's one more thing," he said. "I saw Emily a few months ago." Linda's eyes widened slightly. "You did?" He nodded. "She was at a bookstore in the city. We talked for a few minutes about work, life, nothing too deep. But before she left, she said something that's been echoing in my mind ever since." "What did she say?" He looked straight at his mother. "She said, 'Don't wait for the right moment, Ethan. Life doesn't wait. People don't wait.'" Linda smiled faintly. "Wise words." "I didn't understand what she meant back then," he said, "but now I do. I've spent so much time waiting for everything to be perfect. I forgot how to live. I came home to stop waiting." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, but inside the little kitchen, everything felt still, like the world itself had paused to listen. Ethan exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. "Coming here wasn't just about visiting," he said quietly. "It was about finding my way back to family, to forgiveness, to love." Linda nodded, her eyes shining with both pride and peace. "Then maybe this is where your new story begins." Ethan smiled through his tears. "Maybe it is." As the rain eased and silence settled once more, a calm understanding filled the space between them. The truth had been spoken, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply real. It was the moment everything changed. The moment where old pain turned into new light. And for the first time in years, both mother and son felt the same quiet certainty that love, once spoken, has the power to heal even the deepest silence. The morning after the rain was clear and calm. The air smelled fresh, carrying the faint sweetness of wet earth and blooming jasmine from the garden outside. Light poured gently through the kitchen window. Resting over the table where Linda and Ethan had spent most of the night talking, neither of them had slept much. But for the first time in years, their silence was comfortable, not filled with distance, but with peace. Linda poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her son. "You always liked it with a spoonful of honey," she said with a small smile. Ethan looked up, surprised. "You still remember that?" "Some things," she said softly. "A mother never forgets." He smiled, the kind of real, unguarded smile she hadn't seen since before his father passed. It warmed her heart more than the morning sun. They sat quietly for a while, sipping their coffee and listening to the chirping of birds outside. The heaviness that had once filled the house now seemed to have lifted, replaced by something lighter, fragile, but full of promise. "Mom," Ethan said after a pause, "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about forgiveness and about love not waiting." Linda turned to him, her expression gentle. "And," he exhaled slowly, "I think I'm ready to stop living in the past. I don't know what the future holds, but I don't want to be afraid of it anymore." Linda reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "That's all any of us can do, Ethan. Keep moving forward, one honest day at a time." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'd like that." Later that morning, Ethan went for a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were still damp from the rain, glistening under the sunlight. Every familiar corner carried a memory: the old oak tree where he used to climb as a boy, the small bookstore where he'd spent hours reading comics, the park bench where he and Emily once shared a laugh over melting ice cream. Everything looked smaller now, quieter. But that quiet wasn't empty. It was healing. He stopped by the park gate and took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. Somewhere deep inside, he felt something shift. Not a sudden burst of happiness, but a calm acceptance. He wasn't that lost boy anymore. He was ready to begin again. When he returned home, Linda was in the living room, arranging fresh flowers in a vase. She looked up as he entered, her face glowing with a serenity that only comes from peace hard-earned. "You were gone for a while," she said. "I went walking," he replied. "I needed to see everything again the way it used to be and the way it is now." She smiled knowingly. Sometimes that's how we say goodbye, not with words, but with understanding. Ethan nodded, his voice gentle. "You're right." That afternoon, they visited the small hill outside town where Linda's husband, Ethan's father, was buried. The grass swayed softly in the breeze. and the trees above whispered with the sound of leaves. Linda placed a single white rose on the headstone. "He would have been proud of you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan knelt beside her. "I hope so. I know so," she replied firmly. "He always believed you'd find your way, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Ethan looked at the name etched in stone and felt something loosen inside. Years of guilt, regret, and unspoken words dissolving quietly in the morning air. "I think I finally understand him," Ethan said softly. "He didn't want me to be perfect. He just wanted me to live honestly, to love fully." Linda nodded. "And now you're doing just that." Key smiled faintly. "I'm trying." That evening, as the sun began to set, the two of them sat on the porch, wrapped in the golden light of dusk. The world around them was still the kind of stillness that feels sacred. "I called Emily," Ethan said suddenly, almost shyly. Linda turned to him, surprised. The next few days slipped by softly, as if time itself had decided to slow down for them. Linda found herself cooking more than usual, humming while she stirred soup or baked bread. The house felt alive again, not because of noise, but because of presence. Ethan's laughter, his footsteps, even his sighs filled the rooms with a quiet comfort she had missed. But under all the warmth, Linda sensed something else, a restlessness in him. Sometimes she would catch him standing by the window, staring into the distance with a faraway look. Other times he'd start to say something, then stop, as if the words were too heavy to lift. One rainy afternoon, fate, or perhaps coincidence, brought them a moment neither of them expected. Linda was in the attic, sorting through old boxes. Dust floated in the air like tiny snowflakes. She smiled as she opened a box labeled Ethan's School Years. Inside were notebooks, crayon drawings, and a small wooden car he'd carved when he was 10. "Ethan," she called from upstairs, "you might want to see this." He climbed the stairs, ducking slightly under the low ceiling. "What did you find?" She held up a faded photo, a picture of them both standing beside his late father's old truck. Ethan was maybe 8 years old, smiling proudly, a baseball cap turned backward on his head. "I haven't seen that in years," he said softly. Taking the photo, Linda watched him as he traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. "You used to love that truck," she said. "I did," he murmured. "I thought Dad was a superhero for driving it." For a while they sat in silence. The attic was warm, filled with the faint scent of cedar and nostalgia. "You know," Linda said after a moment, "your father would have been proud of the man you've become." Ethan smiled faintly, though there was a shadow in his eyes. "I hope so. Why wouldn't he be?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "Because sometimes I'm not sure I've lived up to what he taught me." Linda tilted her head, sensing something important beneath his words. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "There was someone I cared about deeply, Mom. Someone who reminded me of everything good I learned from you and Dad. Kindness, patience, honesty. But I walked away from her because I thought I wasn't enough." Linda felt her heart tighten, not with judgment, but empathy. "And now? Now I can't stop thinking about her," he admitted quietly. "About the things I should have said, and the things I didn't." There was a long pause, the kind that carried weight, but not discomfort. Linda reached for another photo from the box. One of Ethan as a teenager, smiling with his high school friends. "Love has a way of waiting," she said softly. "Sometimes it lingers until we're ready to understand it." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable, yet full of meaning. "Do you really believe that?" She smiled gently. "Do? I've seen it." That evening, the rain eased into a drizzle. Ethan offered to fix the squeaky hinge on the porch door, something he used to do for her as a teenager. Linda stood nearby, holding the flashlight. "Hand me that screwdriver," he asked. She passed it to him and laughed. "Still bossing me around in my own house," he grinned. "Old habits." For a moment they shared a glance that lingered, not romantic, but deeply emotional. It was the look between two people who had walked through storms together and still stood strong. Then, as Ethan tightened the final screw, the porch light flickered. "Oh no, not again," Linda muttered. That thing's been acting up for weeks. I'll check it, he said, reaching for the bulb. But as he did, the light suddenly glowed bright, casting a warm glow over both of them. The timing felt strange, almost symbolic. They both froze, looking at the sudden brightness as the rain shimmered in golden reflections outside. Ethan laughed quietly. Guess it just needed a touch of patience. Linda smiled, her eyes glistening. Just like people. Their laughter faded into quiet again, comfortable, knowing full of shared understanding later that night. Linda couldn't sleep. She walked into the living room and found Ethan sitting on the couch, staring at the photo from the attic. "You're awake too?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I've been thinking." She sat beside him. About her. "About everything," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About how fast life moves. How we wait for the right moment, thinking it'll come, and sometimes it never does." Linda looked at him, her heart full. Then maybe this is the right moment. He turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" She smiled softly. "Fate doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just whispers and waits for you to listen. Maybe you came home to remember what love feels like before you try again." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled deeply as if something heavy had finally lifted. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe I needed to come back to where it all started. To remember who I was." Linda placed her hand over his. "You're still that boy, Ethan. The one who believed in goodness even when the world didn't make sense." He looked down at their joined hands and smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." "It's my job," she said softly. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The clouds parted just enough for the moonlight to spill through the window. The world felt cleaner, quieter, as if something had just shifted between them. Not a dramatic change. Not an explosion of emotion, but a calm realization that sometimes life brings you full circle, not to start over, but to remind you what truly matters. Ethan leaned back on the couch, his voice gentle. "Thanks for always believing in me, Mom." Linda smiled, eyes shining with quiet pride. "Always." And as the night settled around them, their hearts, once burdened by distance and silence, found a new rhythm. One built not on words, but on understanding. Somewhere in that quiet moment, fate had done its work, not with thunder or lightning, but with a single light bulb glowing warm in the dark. Morning light crept softly through the curtains, painting pale gold patterns across the living room floor. Linda stirred awake on the couch, a thin blanket draped across her shoulders. For a moment, she didn't remember falling asleep there. Then she saw Ethan sitting near the window, his eyes distant, watching the world beyond the glass. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked quietly. He turned, surprised. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said, pulling the blanket tighter. "I guess the rain and memories kept us both up." Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes told another story. "It's strange," he said. "Coming back here feels like walking through a dream I forgot I had." Linda studied him carefully. The way he fidgeted with his hands, the way his gaze kept shifting. Something was building in him, something he hadn't yet found the courage to say, "Ethan." She said gently, "You've been carrying something since you got here. I can feel it. Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." He exhaled slowly as though her words had loosened something inside him. "I know," he whispered. "I'm just not sure how to start." They sat in silence for a while, the soft ticking of the clock marking time between their thoughts. Outside, the morning fog began to lift, revealing the quiet street and the maple trees glistening with dew. "When I left home," Ethan began, "I thought I had everything figured out. I wanted to prove I could build a life on my own, make you proud." Linda's eyes softened. "You've never needed to prove that, sweetheart." He nodded slowly. "I know. But back then, I thought strength meant distance. That to grow, I had to walk away from everything familiar. I told myself I'd come back when I was successful, when everything was perfect. And now?" she asked softly. He looked down at his hands. "Now I realize there's no such thing as perfect. I've made choices that changed everything. Some good, some Not so good. Linda felt a quiet ache rise in her chest. We all make choices, Ethan. What matters is what we learn from them. He gave a small, sad smile. That's what she used to say, Linda asked carefully. He nodded. Her name's Emily. I told you a little about her the other day. His voice grew softer. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But I let fear get in the way. I walked away before she could, thinking it would hurt less. Linda watched him, her heart tightening at the pain in his voice. Did you love her? He hesitated, not out of doubt, but because the word itself felt too fragile to speak. Yes, he said finally. Akti. Did. Maybe I still do. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy but tender, filled with the kind of silence that comes when the heart finally begins to open. Linda rose from the couch and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out an old wooden box, small, worn, the kind that held keepsakes too precious to discard. She opened it and took out a folded piece of paper. This, she said, handing it to him, was your father's handwriting. He wrote it the day before you left for college. Ethan unfolded the note carefully. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear. Son, the world will ask you to be many things: strong, brave, successful. But I hope you'll never forget to be kind. And if you ever lose your way, come home. That's where love will find you again. Ethan's eyes glistened as he read. I didn't know he left this. You were too young to understand then, Linda said softly. But I think he knew you'd need it someday. He sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. Maybe that's why I came home, he whispered. Because somewhere deep down I knew I'd lost my way. Linda smiled faintly, her own eyes misting. You didn't lose your way, Ethan. You just took the long road back. They went for a walk later that afternoon. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine. As they passed the old park where the house had never felt this quiet. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed slower than usual, as if it too had grown tired of waiting. Linda sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, her eyes wandering toward the streetlight that flickered outside her home in Maplewood, a peaceful little neighborhood where nothing ever truly happened, except inside people's hearts. Her son Ethan hadn't been home in nearly a year. He was always busy, traveling for work, chasing goals she didn't quite understand. Every time he called, his voice sounded further away. It's like he was speaking from another life entirely. Linda smiled faintly at the thought of him. My little boy, she whispered, even though he was 27 now. Time had turned the child she once carried into a man with a life of his own. But lately, something inside her felt heavier than usual, an ache that no routine could fix. She went through her days quietly, making breakfast for one, watering the garden, folding laundry that barely filled a basket. She tried not to dwell on the silence that followed her everywhere every evening. She would sit on the porch with a soft blanket and watch the sun sink behind the maple trees. That was her favorite time of day, the hour when everything slowed down, when she could almost believe that the world might surprise her again. Tonight felt different, though. The air carried a strange stillness. The wind brushed against her cheek as if whispering, something's coming. She smiled sadly at her own imagination. Don't be silly, Linda, she murmured. It's just another quiet evening. But deep down she felt it. That pull in her chest, that soft hum of expectation she couldn't explain. The kettle whistled, breaking her thoughts. Linda stood up, pouring fresh water into her teacup. The house smelled faintly of lavender and lemon soap, her little comforts against the weight of time. On the fridge hung old photos of Ethan, his first day of school, his graduation. That picture of the two of them laughing at the beach, she touched the edge of one photo, smiling through the warmth in her eyes. You always made everything brighter, she whispered, just then. A faint sound came from the porch, the soft creak of wood. A footstep, hesitant but real. Her heart skipped. She turned toward the door, listening. Another sound. Closer, this time Linda placed the cup down and walked slowly to the entrance, her mind racing. Could it be a neighbor? Or maybe the mail left late again? But then she saw it, a familiar shadow through the frosted glass. Her breath caught. She reached for the handle, hands trembling slightly. The door opened with a faint click. There he was, Ethan, standing in the doorway. Soaked from the rain, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His face looked older, not in years, but in experience. His eyes, however, were the same, soft, searching, full of something unspoken. "Hi, Mom." For a moment, Linda couldn't speak. The air between them filled with 1,000 unasked questions and 1,000,000 unsent messages. "Ethan," she whispered, "you didn't tell me you were coming." He smiled weakly. "I wasn't sure I would. I just needed to be here." The warmth in her chest returned, the kind that hurt, but in a beautiful way. "Well, come in before you catch a cold," she said, trying to sound casual. But her voice trembled, betraying her emotions. As he stepped inside, she realized how much she had missed the sound of his presence. The small, simple noises that made the house feel alive again. She helped him hang his coat, then turned to face him. For a moment, they just stood there, quietly studying each other, mother and son. Separated by time, but bound by love that never faded. Linda reached out hesitantly, unsure if a hug would feel too sudden. But Ethan took the step instead. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole again. The warmth of his embrace, the smell of rain in his hair, the way his heartbeat matched hers, all of it brought back a rush of memories, bedtime stories, scraped knees, laughter in the kitchen. Linda closed her eyes. "I've missed you so much," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said quietly. "I've missed you too." They stood like that for a long while, saying nothing. The world outside faded, the rain, the wind, the ticking clock, all of it disappeared into the stillness of their reunion. Then, just as she began to let go, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Mom," he said softly. Something in his tone made her look up. His eyes glistened with an emotion she couldn't name, something heavy, something heartfelt. "I need to tell you something," he continued. "Something I should have said a long time ago." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his gaze flickering between her eyes and the floor. "Not yet," he said finally. "But I promise, I will." Linda nodded slowly, though her curiosity burned quietly inside her. "All right," she said gently. "When you're ready." For the rest of the evening, they sat together in the living room, talking about simple things, the neighbors, travels, the way the garden had bloomed this year. But underneath their words, there was something else, a current of unspoken emotion, a story waiting to be told. As the night grew deeper, Ethan looked around the room at the familiar furniture, the family photos, the glow of the fireplace, and said quietly, "It feels good to be home." Linda smiled. "It feels good to have you home." And though she didn't know it yet, that hug, that quiet moment by the doorway, would mark the beginning of something far more profound than she could ever imagine. A moment that would soon change the way she saw her son and herself. The next morning began quietly, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from peace. The rain had stopped, and the soft light of dawn spilled through the kitchen window. Painting golden streaks across the table, Linda moved about gently, humming a tune she hadn't realized she still remembered. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and smiled when she heard footsteps down the hallway. Ethan appeared, hair still damp from his shower, wearing the same shy smile he'd had since he was a boy. "Morning," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Good morning," Linda replied. "I wasn't sure how you take your coffee these days, so I made it the way you used to like it, just a little milk, no sugar." He took the cup from her, his eyes softening. "You remember that?" "Of course," she said warmly. "Mothers don't forget these things." They sat together at the table, sipping quietly. For a while, neither spoke. There was something tender about the silence, not awkward, just full of all the things they didn't need to say. Finally, Linda broke the quiet. "You know," she said, "I was thinking last night about the summer when you were 15, when we got caught in that thunderstorm at the lake." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. You mean the one where I tried to be brave and ended up hiding under your jacket? She laughed softly. Exactly that one. You were so sure you could out-paddle the storm. I was stubborn, he said with a grin. You still are. She teased. They both smiled, their laughter fading into a moment of stillness. The memory lingered between them, warm, bittersweet. It wasn't just about a summer storm. It was about who they were back then. A mother and son who had leaned on each other through everything after breakfast. Linda walked out to the garden and Ethan followed. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming roses. He watched as she knelt by the flower bed, gently brushing away fallen petals. I miss this, he said quietly. The garden, she asked. He shook his head. You, this house. The feeling of belonging. Linda paused, her heart catching on that word belonging. She looked up at him, remembering how restless he'd been after college. How he'd left with a spark in his eyes, chasing dreams in distant cities. She'd been proud but also afraid that in finding his own life, he'd forget the one he came from. I never wanted to hold you back, she said softly. I just wanted you to find happiness wherever it led. I know, Mom. Ethan's voice grew quieter. But somewhere along the way, I think I lost what happiness meant. She straightened up and studied him, the lines of worry etched near his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders. He looked like a man who had faced too much too soon. Do you remember the night before you left for college? She asked. He smiled faintly. How could I forget? You stayed up with me until sunrise. We packed, unpacked, and packed again. Linda laughed softly. You wanted to take everything you owned, even the lamp from your nightstand. I was afraid of leaving home, he admitted. I didn't want to say it back then, but I was terrified. Her smile faded gently. And yet you still went. You were brave. Ethan looked at her, then really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of time lost, of love never doubted but sometimes forgotten in the noise of growing up. They sat on the back porch as the sun climbed higher, the light filtering through the trees. A soft breeze carried the smell of pine and old memories. Ethan rested his elbows on his knees. Mom, do you ever wish things had turned out differently? Linda tilted her head. In what way? I don't know, he said slowly. Maybe if I hadn't moved so far away. If I'd visited more. I keep thinking about all the moments I missed. Birthdays, dinners, quiet talks like this. She reached over and touched his hand gently. Life moves faster than we realize. What matters is that you're here now. Ethan looked down at her hand on his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed too still. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried years of unspoken forgiveness. As the afternoon light shifted, Linda went inside and returned with an old photo album. Do you